I just want to start out tonight with doing a bit of foundational work backing off identity wars, and then build into what we'll look at tonight in Genesis chapter 3 in regard to Satan assuming the form of a serpent. Colin and I we were talking a bit about this the other night, but I just want to back a little bit in terms of Satan's statement to Eve, you shall not surely die. And of course in the identity war system, the emphasis there is autonomy. It's the concept of I don't need anything, and what I do is for me, and that extends into other thought processes like, well, what I'm doing doesn't hurt anybody else. This is all the autonomy principle of you shall not surely die. It doesn't matter what I do, I'm not hurting anybody else. And, you know, I'm thinking of Paul Simon's song, I'm a rock, I'm an island, you know, I'm completely autonomous, I don't need anybody else, and that's that protection mechanism. Of course, in the relational kingdom, in God's kingdom, the channel of blessing system, the love of the Father for His Son, it's all connected, everything is connected, and everything that we are doing has an influence on everybody else. And of course, Romans tells us this. Romans 4:2. No man lives to himself. No man dies to himself. That's the verse. I thought it was in Romans 4:2.
Romans 14:7.
There it is.
Yeah, 47. For none of us liveth of himself, and no man dieth of himself.
None of us live to himself. Everything we do has an influence on those around us. And this has many layers to it. And I want to read to you a statement that is profound, and it reminds me, and I think Eddie and Fiona, you were there when I did you remember I did my champagne glass with Coca-Cola experiment at Eden's Landing Church, and a number of the young people said, no, you're wasting the Coke! And the influence that my cup runneth over, and whatever is in the cup is running over, is influencing. We've also talked about the principle about in Matthew 12:29, or else how can one enter into a strong man's house and spoil his goods? And that word goods means wife and children. It can have that meaning. Except he first bind the strong man, and he'll spoil his house. And we have talked in previous presentations a number of years ago about the fact that a man may put locks on his doors and on his windows and everything like that, but if he doesn't have his mind guarded, if his mind is given over to a wrong spirit, then his wife and children will be affected by that. That is quite a daunting concept. And of course it's the same for the wife in regard to her children. Her thought processes, her attitudes, her mindset is either a protection or a breach for her children in terms of Satan's capacity to influence them. That is a tremendously high calling in terms of just those moments when we feel the world's a little bit too hard and we want to have these moments of self-indulgence in whatever it is to make ourselves, to reward ourselves with something other than whatever that is righteous. And so this statement in 5T is profound. I've read this a number of times and thought, wow, this is intense. This is 5T 111. Point 1, the influence of every man's thoughts and actions. There's a divine pattern, invisible, visible. Thoughts and actions surround him like an invisible atmosphere which is unconsciously breathed in by all who come in contact with him. Yeah. You talk about porn kills love. You think about that. Unconscious atmosphere, the thoughts inside of a man or a woman, those thoughts are create an invisible atmosphere which is unconsciously breathed. How does that work? Breathed. Breathed in what sense? It's obviously a spiritual breath, isn't it? There's a spiritual induction. We're all connected in that sense. And then it goes, this atmosphere is frequently charged with poisonous influences. And when these are inhaled, the language is interesting, isn't it? When these are inhaled, moral degeneracy is the sure result. I find that statement both alarming and incredibly powerfully good. When we take hold of Christ and when we're having thoughts about our Father in heaven and we have a sense of love for Him, that has an influence on everyone around you and especially your family. It has an influence on them. And this is one of the things that gives me confidence and courage in terms of the repentance, the sense of my need, and this is something that I've been cognizant of in terms of, regardless of anybody else is doing wrong thing, if I've done wrong, I must confess it, because it will have an influence on those around me, as well as be a blessing to myself. It is right to do, because regardless of what other people think, it is right to do because it not only will bless me, but it will have an influence on those around me. And there's things that I think about on a regular basis in terms of the influence of my thoughts. And that's quite challenging, isn't it? When we think about our thought life, and the thoughts that we have are an influence. They are constantly producing an atmosphere which everybody else is inhaling, that you come in contact with. And of course, for family members where it doesn't matter whether you are in the same vicinity as each other, that connection is there because of the house band principle. Doesn't matter how far away your wife and your children are, if you have a violation, you automatically create a breach wherever they are on the face of the earth. You create a breach for them. It's daunting in terms of those implications. And we've been looking at this in terms of Leviticus 18, 25, talking about all the sexual promiscuity, incest, adultery, homosexuality. And again, I just have to put that caveat in there again. In terms of the grading of sin, adultery somehow doesn't seem to be as bad as homosexuality. But the punishment was the same for both. You got the same result in the end. It's just one is moving a little bit further down the line, but it leads in the same direction, and that is to death. But notice we see in Leviticus 18:25, what does it say? Leviticus 18:25. And the land is defiled therefore. After listing all these sins, it says, and the land is defiled therefore. I do visit the iniquities thereof upon it, and the land itself vomiteth out the inhabitants thereof. This concept of moral depravity having an effect on the earth. This is quite a startling concept for people to take in. How can, I am a rock, I am an island. No, what I do doesn't affect anybody else. Well, I'm sorry. We are all connected. All of us are connected. And the people around us have an effect. We are in their moral atmosphere as well as them being in ours. And that's interesting in terms of when we come in contact with leprosy. Do we contract leprosy or do they get healed? It's something to think about, isn't it?
Quite often our young people feel that, I can go off and do something and it's not going to affect you, it's only about me. But, it's like the ripple in the pond. You don't realise that in a family, whatever you do does affect and hurt, and not against, but hurt for them, for what's happening.
Yeah.
And that Matthew 12:29 is so many things that, as you said, parents and just the great responsibility, so much to feel repentance for that you think, oh my goodness, you remember back and you think, oh, I need to repent for that, and how it didn't help your children in things.
Yeah. This goes on and on. It goes over your head in terms of the things that we didn't know. And And you know, we think about the implications of the moral atmosphere of actually worshipping a God that doesn't exist, a God that the Bible calls an idol, and having that thought process in your mind. What impact does that have on the people around you? It's not good, is it? What about having this concept in the back of your mind that or in the forefront of your mind that God burns to death those who are wicked? That has an impact on the mind. And it creates an influence. And the influence that is often created with that kind of a belief is an urgency to categorise myself as one of the righteous and to find a group of people that I can scapegoat to say that are wicked, so that my concept of God's wrath is poured out on somebody else rather than myself. It generates Pharisaism. It automatically creates that mindset. And you know, we talked about the other week about penal substitution and penalty and God's wrath, and it creates such psychological dysfunction, and we're all living with those. We're living in those streams of that kind of dysfunction. And so, with that in mind, I want to go to Genesis chapter 3 and verse 1. And I began looking at this because we've been looking at the sacrificial system, and we know that God instituted the sacrificial system, but trying to understand why. Why did God institute a system that would lead to the slaughter of millions of animals? Many people ask this question. It's difficult, and we read when we were looking at this last week. We read the statement where Helen White says that when Adam fell, that a voice came out of the throne with mysterious import, saying, "Sacrifice and offering I have not required." What does that mean? And we read in Jeremiah when it says, "When you came out of the land of Egypt, I didn't require sacrifice and offering." What does that mean? This trying to grapple with this whole understanding. So I've gone back and I've started to search, but then I got dragged into another very, very interesting subject, which I thought I'd share tonight. And we notice in verse 1, would someone like to read that? 3:1, Genesis.
Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. He said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden?
So another word for subtle. What does the word subtle mean? More subtle. Wise. Cunning. Prudent is another, I think, is that H5175?
Isn't it ARUW?
I'm not sure the actual word. My accounting background, I remember the numbers. 5175, is that the number or not?
The guy is
H6175.
Oh, 6175. Okay, yeah, 6175. I think that word also can be used for prudent.
Crafty.
Prudent, crafty. So it's saying here that the serpent was more prudent, crafty, wise than any beast of the field.
Also says sly.
Sly?
Cunning in a bad sense.
Now,
Crafty, brutal, subtle. Yeah.
So when it's talking about the serpent, who is it actually talking about?
Satan.
Okay. So was he more cunning than any beast of the field?
Yes.
Okay, obviously he was. But when we're talking about the serpent and being in comparison to the beast of the field, this is where we need to understand, like, are we talking about the serpent or only about Satan, or Satan and the serpent? There's kind of
confusion.
There's a bit of a confusion here.
Ellen White talks about Satan uses instruments, and the serpent was used as his instrument.
Okay, perfect. Now, I want to read Spirit Prophecy Volume 1, page 35, and I want you to notice, when my wife and I were reading this for worship the other morning, and I went, dong, like, hang on, what's going on here? Satan assumes the form of a serpent. Now, when you read those words, I think of Satan just taking that form, transforming himself, okay, and enters Eden. And then she says this, the serpent was a beautiful creature. I can't think of a serpent being beautiful. With wings while flying through the air, his appearance was bright, resembling burnished gold. So this creature had light. Okay?
See, burnished gold is what Ellen White is about when the Holy Spirit descended on Christ at the baptism.
Okay. Interesting language, isn't it? There's something about this. But now she's talking about, is she talking now about Satan or about the created being, the created object or animal called the serpent? She's talking about the serpent. And it resembling burnished gold. He did not go upon the ground, this is obviously talking about the serpent, but went from place to place through the air and ate fruit like man. So this is the wisest of all the creatures of the garden. Wiser than a horse, wiser than an owl, wiser than any other creature in the garden. It was one of the most beautiful creatures. It had light. And this is what the serpent originally was. Now it says this: Satan entered into the serpent and took his position in the tree of knowledge. Do you detect a conflict here? It said Satan assumed the form of a serpent, and then it says Satan entered into the serpent. Immediately I had what's that? What is that?
The way I think of it, it takes possession, like Satan possesses somebody, or evil spirits possess something that goes in and captures their mind and makes them work through it.
So now we come into everything that I talked about before in terms of jurisdiction and protection. What right did Satan have to enter that serpent? Who did that serpent belong to? Adam. Adam was given dominion. Adam and Eve were given dominion over every beast of the field. Satan had no right to enter into that serpent. But why was he allowed to enter into that serpent? This is the question that I began to think about. It doesn't seem fair, it doesn't seem right that Satan would be able to do this. And so, page 36 of Spirit of Prophecy, volume 1, it says, Eve's curiosity was aroused. Instead of fleeing from the spot, she listened to hear a serpent talk. It did not occur to her mind that it might be the fallen foe using the serpent as a medium. So there is an actual serpent being used here. But she says first he assumed the form of a serpent, and then he entered into the serpent. A little bit more on this. About Satan chose to employ as his medium the serpent, a disguise well adapted for his purpose of deception. The serpent was then one of the wisest and most beautiful creatures on the earth. Do we typically associate wisdom with an animal? Wisdom is usually connected to reasoning power. I mean, you don't think of an animal being wise. You think of an animal having instinct. It has programming in it that it knows how to act in a certain way. But this is the word wisdom. It was the wisest. And again, I find that very, very interesting. Now we come to the issue of the divine pattern in terms of stepping back a bit in terms of relationship with Adam and Eve. And again, I am looking at, this is Patriarchs and Prophets, page 53. It says, the angels had cautioned Eve to beware of separating herself from her husband. Why doesn't it say the angels cautioned Adam not to let Eve out of his sight? Why doesn't it say that?
Possessive, controlling.
No. It's speaking to the side of free will. The freedom of choice to be where you choose to be, not speaking to the issue of control. Lest men reading that passage in the future would say, see, I'm not allowed to let you out of my sight.
It wouldn't have been much of a temptation if Satan had turned up as he was.
Correct.
You know, and they're going, hang on, no, you're the other person. Thank you very much.
Beguiled.
So I guess God has given Satan a bit of leeway to see which way it would go, having free choice, and Satan's chosen to use the serpent.
And we have to ask ourselves a question. The serpent belonged to Adam. Why was he allowed to enter into that dominion and break through? He broke through something in order to be able to take control of that serpent, which was not his jurisdiction to do so. And this is the question that I want to pursue. Separated from her husband while occupied in their daily labour in the garden. With him, she would be in less danger from temptation than if she were alone. Is that a principle that carries through to today? It's interesting, isn't it? She would have less temptation if she stayed with her husband than if she were alone, and that speaks to a whole lot of challenges in terms of how homes protect themselves from the serpent through YouTube and Facebook and other places where the serpent can come straight into a home, and the parents or the father or the husband doesn't even know, doesn't even have any. The gates have just opened a lot wider.
Forget YouTube and Facebook, you have television
Yep.
and music as well. All these.
All of those things. Well, television and music is a little harder to hide. With the internet, it's on your phone, and it's harder. But if you've got a TV and other people will see what you're watching, it can be a little bit more supervised or controlled. Music, in your headphones, maybe you can do it that way. So, and here we come to an interesting point. So she was told by the angels not to separate from her husband. That's good advice, isn't it? It's not like this was optional. Like to ignore this was going to create a problem. And so it says, but absorbed in her pleasing task, she unconsciously wandered from his side. On perceiving that she was alone, she felt an apprehension of danger. But, here's that word, but dismissed her fears, deciding that she had sufficient wisdom and strength to discern evil and to withstand it. So Eve is given dominion over the garden. She inherited Adam's dominion. The dominion that God gave him, she inherited all the fullness of the manhood bodily. And she was given that dominion. So when she made that decision that she could handle this situation on her own, and she has an atmosphere and an influence around her, what did that do to those creatures under her dominion?
It would have pervaded into them.
Did it create a breach?
So we're talking about the invisible influence before the physical influence took place. That's the pattern.
That's the pattern. The invisible before the visible.
Wow.
She did something outside of the divine pattern. When she was unconscious of it, there's no problem. But once she became aware of it, she should have gone back to her husband. But she didn't. She chose to believe that she had sufficient wisdom to face whatever challenges might come. Now that then permeates the garden. That spirit permeates the garden because she has dominion over the garden. And the serpent is under her dominion, which she inherited from her husband. Is that right? These are just some thoughts that I'm processing. When Eve decided she had sufficient wisdom outside what she was instructed by the angels, did she place the animals in the garden in jeopardy? This is the question. Otherwise, how is it possible for Satan to be able to enter the serpent? Did it place the serpent in a position where he was more vulnerable to the influence of Satan? These are interesting things, very interesting things. And when we talk about animals, I want to read you something else in terms of animals, because I wanted to pursue this as far as I could in terms of how much Dr. Dolittle is there. You know what I'm saying? In terms of conversing with the animals and having a connection with the animals. We know that... Sorry? So...
Adrian, it's really interesting, all your comments and stuff like that Satan was watching and saw Eve separate from her husband. So he must have been just waiting in the garden the whole time.
Yeah. This was important for him. He was monitoring the whole situation. I guess he would have had his plebs there, watching and quick.
And I
in.
just wonder whether it was opportunistic to jump into the serpent. If there had been any other animal there, would he have done the same?
Yeah, well, I guess, yeah, we'll find out when we get to heaven the exact detail as to he had to get an animal that would fly up into the tree, or something that would be in the tree, or at least, or maybe you'd get Mr. Ed, the horse, to stand next to the tree. I don't know, but
Animal like snakes that the serpent ate fruit.
yes. So the serpent ate fruit.
Yes. So it's interesting that you would find the serpent on the tree that she was told not to eat from.
Yeah, it's so that she knew that it ate fruit. Now this is an interesting statement. If animals could speak, now this is talking about the situation with Balaam. It's Signs of the Times, November 25, 1880. If animals could speak, what deeds of horror would be revealed? What tales of suffering because of the perversity of man's temper? How often those creatures of God's care suffer pain, endure hunger and thirst because they cannot make known their wants. And how often is it determined by the mercy or the caprice of man whether they receive attention and kindness nor neglect and abuse? Punishment given in passion to an animal is frequently excessive and is then absolute cruelty. Animals have a kind of dignity and self-respect akin to that possessed by human beings. They have a dignity of their own in the way that they are treated. If abused under the influence of blind passion, their spirits will be crushed and they will become nervous, irritable and ungovernable. So why are there so many animals in the world today that are ungovernable? Because men are cruel and tyrannical. Their spirit of harshness or whatever has an influence on the animals. And so many of the animals are aggressive and violent because that's what man is. And so this was a statement, as I continued to search and I thought about, was there some kind of submission process that the serpent submitted to Satan in order to enter the serpent, as it says, that the serpent somehow would have to yield itself to Lucifer, knowing that he belonged in some capacity to Adam? And I thought, how far can we go with this? Is there anything in the Spirit of Prophecy, anything in the Bible that indicate this relationship? And as I prayed about it, I came upon this statement. Now catch this. A heavy curse rested upon the serpent in Eden because he was the medium Satan used. So this is talking about the serpent. It's not talking about Satan. It's talking about the serpent. A heavy curse rested upon the serpent in Eden because he was the medium Satan used to tempt our first parents to transgress. Now she makes the comparison. And listen carefully to the words. And whoever yields themselves to subvert others, a heavy curse from God will follow them. Did the serpent yield itself to subvert others? It's interesting, isn't it? That's in the book Solemn Appeal, page 77. Interesting. This communication, this ability. Eve separating from her husband, opening a breach in the protection channel, which allowed Satan to assume a form, have some kind of connection with the actual serpent. The serpent yields itself to Lucifer, Satan, and then is possessed by Satan.
Do humans do the same thing? Do humans do the same thing? By allowing themselves to be possessed by Satan, as opposed to pushing them away?
And why are we brought to the point of asking these questions? Why do these questions begin to surface? Because we have begun to look at our Father in heaven through the lens of Jesus Christ, and for God simply to allow his creatures to be invaded and taken over by Satan is not how our Father operates. He does not operate like that. He protects his children. He protects his creatures. And there has to be reasons why Satan was allowed to violate and enter into this serpent.
I always find it interesting that in Steps to Redemption or something Redemption?
Story of Redemption.
Thank you. Where it says that Eve, when she was separate from Adam, that when Satan spoke to her, she didn't immediately rise up and go, "Ooh, no one else is supposed to speak to me." That she didn't go, "There's the voice of a stranger speaking to me." She didn't run away or turn and flee, go back to find Adam. She went, she didn't question it. She should have.
But the thing is, if he spoke like an angel, because she would have gone, oh, there's some recognition of the speech.
No, but
would have allayed that fear.
No, because it says in it, Ellen White says it because it was the voice of a stranger, and she knew that no one else was supposed to speak to her without Adam. But she allowed the voice of the stranger to speak to her. She should have been alarmed at that someone else was allowed to speak to her so familiarly, in familiar terms, and she didn't.
Strike two for Eve.
Yeah.
Whoa.
I found that very poignant.
But the curiosity of a serpent eating fruit and speaking overrode that concern. It was curious, like, oh, this is that fascination with evil, that fascination with that which is not correct, overrode that. She was fascinated. And of course, we know that Ellen White also says that the serpent flattered her and told her that she was beautiful. And it says this was not displeasing to Eve, to be flattered by someone other than her husband.
The tree of good and evil was right next to the tree of life, wasn't it?
Sorry?
The tree of good and evil was right next to the tree of life. Is that...
I don't have any indication that that was the case.
Because they would have known where that tree was.
It was amidst the garden.
Yeah, it was in the midst of the garden. Where in the midst of the garden? Was the tree of life in the midst of the garden?
I don't think the Bible says.
No, sorry?
I don't think the Bible actually says that.
It doesn't say where the
It only
tree
says
of
where
life
the
is.
tree of knowledge was.
It was in the midst of the garden.
However, the angels were sent to guard it, and it was in the garden itself. That's all
They
it
were definitely in
says.
the garden.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the garden.
In the garden.
Whether they were close by, I think going to have to go to the tree of life and then wonder at this tree over here might not be such a a good thing, but we don't know. We really don't know on that score. So now I began to think about is there a Dr. Dolittle effect? And I'm using that term in terms of some level of communication that Adam had with the creation that was given into his hand by our Father. And I prayed, and Laurel reminded me of a statement, and I couldn't find it. We knelt down and prayed. I found it like that. And this was the statements that we found. It's in Signs of the Times, January 28, 1897. A beautiful soft light proceeded from God and shrouded the holy pair and was reflected from every object upon which they looked. So the light around them reflected from every object that they looked upon. God was their teacher, and in the beauties of nature around them, his lessons were repeated. The invisible things of God were clearly seen and understood by the things which he had made. So this light that was around them helped them to interpret clearly the meaning of what was in these created things, and it gave to them information. And when that light disappeared, they lost that capacity.
And the light was the Spirit of God.
So the Spirit of God
illuminates.
The Spirit was illuminating, through them, illuminating.
Yeah.
Interesting, isn't it? Sorry, mate.
No,
So you just have to listen to this quote before you go. And I said one more prayer, and I said, is there anything else in there? And I in my mind immediately came two words, Adam and converse. Okay, type that in. Up comes this quote. The angels had cautioned Eve to beware of separating herself from her husband. No, that wasn't the quote, sorry. Here it is. The mysteries of the invisible universe, the wondrous works of him which is perfect in knowledge, afforded them an exhaustless source of instruction and delight. The laws and operations of nature, which have engaged men's study for 6,000 years, were opened to their minds by the infinite framer and upholder of all. So and how is he doing it? Through the Spirit. How is that happening? Through the light that was around them. They held converse with leaf and flower and tree. Converse. Gathering from each the secrets of its life. Now, obviously, it's not converse as in audible language and the mode of communication that human beings have. It's not that kind of converse, but it was a type of converse. And when I read Webster's dictionary, the most common meaning of the word was discussion, back and forth discussion in some way. There was a meaning of converse to mean, I guess, nature is speaking to you of its creator in some capacity. But it's interesting she would use that word converse. There's some level of
There's an
connection.
impartation backwards and
Yeah.
forwards of information, isn't there?
There's a back and a forth.
Yeah.
In some capacity that we have lost since the fall.
Which ties back to what you were saying before about the influence of what's in here on that which is around, and then the reflection back of that which is a pattern of God to us and us to God.
But when you're filled with the Spirit and you're reading the Bible, you have a converse with the Bible. You see it and it's talking to you, and you can. That's what happens.
So the spirit is illumining the created object or animal or whatever, and it's speaking back to you, as in the lessons that it has to teach you. So as to how far we can take that converse, I don't know. But the fact we have to understand, as it says here, that the serpent was punished for allowing itself to be used as a medium by Satan to subvert man. Why would the snake be punished if it was just an innocent medium? Unless we just have the thought that God is tyrannical in his nature and says, well, I need to set a lesson, so I'm going to make the snake live a miserable life and be hated and feared by everyone simply because I've decided by my sovereign will that's what's going to happen to the serpent. That's not what our Father is like.
But the thing is, the serpent was the wisest of all.
The wisest of all the creatures in the garden.
So it would have been up to reason, you would think.
This is the question. This is the question that I'm putting out in terms of if horses today can read the emotional state of an individual, can understand and do and react in certain ways, and the serpent was wiser than that.
Well, serpents do that. Like if you're walking along and you don't see a serpent, you can walk over it. It won't do a thing, but as soon as it sees your eye contact,
The eye contact, yeah.
it's a different game. So yeah, I've done it many times.
As long as you make eye contact, all of a sudden it goes, okay.
And it's the same with the kangaroos. So we've got the kangaroos and they can be as close, we can walk past each other as close. If I don't look at them, I'll stay there. If I look at them, I'll take off. Or I can walk right past them. No, they just don't look at them. You can even be looking in that sort of direction, but don't eye contact.
I was
Interesting.
thinking, I wonder if when it says that Adam was grieving when the first leaf fell off, that was it part of the whole converse back that death was now coming out, and not just the seeing of it, but actually the whole process.
A comprehension of the suffering of the plant in the death process of the plant in whatever capacity, and this is part of the process of us as we look at the subject of the cross and become aware of Christ's suffering every day, an awareness that he does not switch off to the agony of all of his created beings around the world, that this agony extends, and that the groan and travail of his soul for all of creation. We have become deadened to a lot of this because of our meat-eating culture and our bulldozer mentality towards the Creator. Well, we're oblivious to the pain and suffering that's being caused, and most people, when you think of bushfires, don't often think of the thousands of animals that are destroyed, displaced, and caused tremendous grief. Cattle that are burned and destroyed, and all the agony that they go through because they can't express their pain as readily as human beings can.
We're being conditioned and that like TV and stuff conditions you. If you do something long enough, you'll be conditioned
Yeah.
to be desensitized to it.
And so, for Adam to weep more bitterly than people today do for their loved ones, well, obviously there's a lot of reasons for that. But it was most interesting to me that as I walked through this process, that had to answer that question in my mind, that there was some kind of submission process that the serpent gave to Satan, but this came about through a violation of the divine pattern of Eve in respect of staying at the side of her husband. And that's the take-home value point in terms of the way that we relate within our homes with each other, and the headship principle that exists, and how we respond in our homes when a husband and a father is stepping out of the commands that Christ has given him, the jeopardy that he places his wife and children in. And when a wife steps out of the headship of her husband, and we live in a culture that is default for wives to step out of the headship of their husbands, without going through proper appeal process and all those types of things, and the jeopardy that creates for the children. Immediately, if we have children that are not walking with the Lord, they are walking outside of the divine pattern. And if a wife is consistently walking outside of the jurisdiction of her husband in her attitude, in her spirit, that spirit that she is feeling will fall on her children and enable Satan to influence them in a greater way than he otherwise could. If she has a submissive spirit, then that spirit is going to fall on her children and close the breach more readily to Satan's influence. And again, the ability of the wife to stay within her husband's jurisdiction is heavily influenced by her husband staying within Christ's jurisdiction. And if he steps out of that, it makes it much harder for her to stay within his jurisdiction. What does this lead us to? God have mercy on me, a sinner. The responsibility that we have to one another, the influence of our thinking, the way that we relate to one another is in this story, it deeply impacted my thinking. Like, wow, it was a divine pattern violation that allowed that serpent to be taken over. Obviously, the serpent played its part, and it's interesting that not only and it's something I hadn't thought about before, but not only did Adam and Eve eat the fruit, but the serpent ate the fruit. And not only did Adam and Eve lose their light, but the serpent lost its light, because the serpent had light and glory as well. And it fell with Adam and Eve as the wisest of all of the creatures. And it's interesting that the serpent is the symbol that is used upon the cross. There is far more to this. There's far more to this than what we readily have thought, in terms of this serpent and its role from the animal kingdom in the fall of man that came about, I believe, if I'm reading this correctly, through a divine pattern violation where Eve separated from her husband. It speaks to me very powerfully about the responsibilities of all of us within this divine pattern and how we relate to one another. Because, let me put it this way, there will be many people, and think about this, and this is a story that comes to my mind. Lot's wife, will she be in the kingdom of heaven? Unlikely. What was she led out by? Her thoughts towards her children and possessions in the city. So her influence, she was told not to look back.
She disobeyed her husband.
And she disobeyed. Spirit of rebellion. This spirit was in her children, and that's why her children also disobeyed Lot and refused to come out. So her own disobedience not only destroyed her children, but destroyed herself as well by violating the divine pattern principle. And this is something that we're going to have to learn much more difficult lessons on this particular point of the divine pattern. And obviously that divine pattern grows even greater in terms of what is the influence of the Seventh-day Adventist Church leadership on its membership. Is there a jurisdiction breach occurring at that level? What is the influence that is occurring? Is there an influence? Does it matter? Or does all men live to themselves and die to themselves? It doesn't matter what the conference president does. Our need to pray for these men is to help us and our families and our children. Good night.
It's interesting, one of the quotes that you were reading, I was also reading it here, said that if you lead someone astray, you pay for your own sin, plus you pay for the sin that you're actually allowing them to do. And that was in, I think, the third quote, and it was a bit further down from it. And I was thinking just what you said, and I'm just going,
That's a real challenge, isn't it? And yet, you know, we live in a culture, an environment that when leaders stand up and say, no, that's not right, that shouldn't be done this way, and the default reaction is, who are you to tell me what to do? I'm sure, Paul, you dealt with that many times. Wearing your badge, who are you to tell me what to do? That spirit of rebellion. And we know, he who would, as it says in the Bible, and it's stated in the mirror format, he who would strike his mother and father shall surely be put to death. Because that's the end result of rebellion. It leads to your death. And this is a principle that we've all grown up with, not really comprehending the severity of this problem, of stepping outside of the jurisdiction of the leadership, both in the church and in the home, that I am a rock, I am an island, nobody tells me what to do. This sense of freedom, the sinfulness that occurs within families because there is a sense of autonomy that says, it doesn't matter what I do and I don't have to worry about what you say and what you do. And this was something that was tremendously significant to me in terms of me standing up and speaking to the leaders in my church that I had been born into and been raised in, and to say, actually, I think there's a problem here. What audacity to speak in that way. And this is the problem that so many people are having who come into the truth of the Father and the Son, is they don't understand pattern principles, and they stand up to the leadership in such a way that will destroy them. Because they are outside the divine pattern. And you know, on this particular point, and I'm sure my wife won't mind mentioning this, but we had a party plan the other day where we had some pots, so you know, some cookware revealed to us, and at the beginning of the program, I was told, you need to put down your details. And I put in my name and address, and I didn't fill in the phone number or the email address. And the person who was conducting the thing said, you need to fill in this part here. I said, it's okay, I'm not going to do that. And then it was said to me, well, the company requires it. And instantly inside of my mind, there was this flash inside of me. You don't tell me what to do inside of my home. There was a conflict, you know, in terms of, I understand your company's principles, but you know, we need to be we need to just sort this out, you know, in terms of what information that I'm willing to hand over. In terms of, I have a duty of care to my family. I know the people who were presenting, and I said, look, I'm willing to you've got my number and we can converse, but I really don't want to put my details down. I'd rather not do that. And so my wife was struggling to understand, what's the big deal? What's the big deal? In terms of, you know, like, and she was kind of like, huh? What are you doing? And in that environment, it was seen like, you know, and at that moment, what do? Do I clamp down? And she says, well, I'll put mine down. And at that point, I said, well, if you want to do that, so I'm not going to say, no, you are not going to do that. If I did that, what would happen?
I always write down my brother's email address and phone number. It's awesome. He gets phone calls from all over the place.
Pure caring, yeah.
What more can you say?
May his funeral plans be often
Thank you.
wonderful.
Thou shalt not bear false witness. So, you know, and because I was working through an issue of coming into my house and telling me that a company requires me in my house to provide information. And, you know, I had to work through in myself, like, stay calm, Adrian, stay calm.
Keep breathing.
Nobody tells me in my home if I'm required to get, there's the door. You know, that's the natural man response. You don't tell me what to do. So, no, Adrian, we don't need to go there. That's over the top. Just stay calm. Keep breathing. It's okay. You get over it. So,
I was just going to say that you can't demand submissiveness.
no,
It has to be voluntary.
it has
And
to
as soon
be.
as you tell somebody you don't do that, or you have to make an emphasis on it, then it's no longer.
It's
a
no
right
longer.
submission.
You can't demand it.
God never demanded it. He just told
Uh,
him. He just told him. Wrote him there.
And so it was just an interesting, and Laurel and I debriefed about it afterwards when we had an opportunity to say there were reasons why you know, it's a principle here in terms of how I protect my family from, I don't know this company. I mean, I'm sure these people, I know plenty of people that work for companies, and those people are very honest and very true, but the companies are crooks. I need to find this information out. I need to know for myself, and I'm not handing over my information to anyone until I've satisfied myself that it's safe for my family to do so. It's just, you know, it's just the way it is. And so that's just that protection process. And so we had to negotiate through that process. So just so you understand, and you know, this is the process I go through. And in the end, and I said to her, so considering all of that happened, and that took place, and that I was still happy to make a purchase, don't you think that was rather good? I had to overcome my I'm ready to hit the flush button right now. So no, just chill. So and that's where many men make a big mistake, where they start to beat their chest and get all worked up, and then just really embarrass themselves. That's, you know.
But see, isn't it, because it was a lady, like, within that whole channel that we're so used to, or in the idyllic situation, to be submissive. The company requires it. I'm told that I have to do it, so I do it.
Correct.
As opposed to thinking, well, we'd like you to do it. But that's just a natural...
So is that the stranger's voice?
And that's true, you know, in terms of I'm just doing what my company, and being submissive to my I'm just telling you this is what my company requires. And so you tell your company. But after we discussed it later on, and it was like, because there was a gift that was being given away that was of substantial value, and they need to make sure that the people were actually there, and this wasn't a bogus situation, that people are just saying, yes, we had guests, but they didn't turn up. Okay, now I understand. Now I have a better understanding of why you need this information. And after the end of the program, I was quite impressed with the product. I was satisfied. I was on my phone while I was talking, and I was checking things out as I want to do. But in the end, I thought, no, this is good. This makes sense to me. What she's saying is right, and so we went ahead. But there was just that issue of I'm standing to a principle, and it's like, what are you doing? And that's dangerous. It's dangerous to do that. And it's dangerous for me to say that. in this world that we live in today. What are you talking about? But these are the principles of headship, and we are being invited as God's people to remember the law of Moses with the statutes and the judgments, to come back into this framework and be very careful how we posture ourselves towards those that are in authority over us, and how we posture ourselves towards those who are under our care, to ensure that we don't drop onto them a spirit that makes them more vulnerable to Satan's attacks. And this is one of the greatest thought processes that I have on this subject. Like, this is huge, and that we know nothing or hardly anything about this particular issue, because we're egalitarian. We're all flat level. Everyone's a rock. Everyone's independent. Everyone, don't tell me what to do. We'll negotiate. I'll meet you halfway. All that kind of stuff. This is completely different from what the Bible is telling us. And so I'm thankful that at least in my home, my wife and I could discuss the challenges calmly and just say, look, this is what was going on for me. And these are the principles. It's my duty to act as scout to make sure that influences don't come into my home that aren't going to cause lots of dollars to float out towards unscrupulous companies that I know nothing about. So, and that's just one little minute thing. But I'm thankful that I said, Lord, you're going to have to help me to process that, so I could continue to listen, and I was able to see, no, this makes a lot of sense to me, and what they're saying is right, and I was willing to make the purchase. These are things that we really need to think about as we progress in our community of faith, and we have situations where, for instance, with those that are elders amongst us, where we might be saying something and to everybody else it doesn't make sense what's being said. Like, what are you talking about? Does the divine pattern kick in? Does it kick in? Does it say, hang on a minute, I need to walk through this process carefully and how I deal with this particular situation? Or do I go, no, I know. I'm assessing this situation and I know. That's what happened to Eve. She assessed the situation when she had separated from her husband, and she came to a conclusion that led to a big problem because she stepped out of the channel of blessing.